Hello and welcome to Share.care's What is Manly radio show and podcast. Men feel more lonely, lost, and not useful in society than ever in history. Males are not attaching to school, work, or women. What it means to be a man appears lost. Is there a framework for being manly that we can unearth?
Welcome to Share.care, an all-inclusive community sharing experience, strength, and hope to create strong, healthy, and inspiring relationships. Share.care communities work toward every individual feeling safe, valued, and heard, free from the threat of danger, pain, or harm. Each episode, founder Damian Andrews explores the principles underpinning Share.care and invites expert special guests to share their knowledge so you can easily reap the benefits so many others experience. You hold the choice to create your future. Let it be with strong, healthy, and inspiring relationships.
Today, it's my great pleasure to have on the show Steve Sandor. Welcome, Steve.
Hello, Damien. How are you?
Well, thank you. And for the audience, Steve is the CEO and business performance strategist of Inspiring Businesses, and he helps business owners get back to doing the things that they love to do with the ones that they love. Now, you have a lot of experience working with both men and women, and we're covering this topic of, and I also noticed that you happen to be a man, and so it's very relevant for this topic that we're talking about, is what is manly, because it seems today there's a lot out there about men actually having lost their way. They're feeling lonely, they're feeling not useful in society, they're feeling a bit lost. From your perspective, I mean, have you experienced that with companies you're working with when dealing with the men there? Have you noticed anything? What's your take on this?
Yeah, it's quite confusing, isn't it? We had a persona that was really clear and concise when, 50, 60 years ago. It seems to have morphed into something different. And I think it's shifting to the right, into the right way. But yeah, there is a I don't know what it is. I think possibly a disconnect between what the perception is of a man and how they need to behave, and what is then expected in the workplace and then at home. And so there's mixed messages coming in. I mean, I'm pretty clear on what what I see as my role as a man, as a father. But I'm 67 years of age, so I've had a fair time to work it out.
Time does give you that. I love what you said before. There was clearly defined roles. Now, we're not saying whether they're right or wrong, but having a clear definition of what's expected or where you're going, that makes a path pretty easy. Whether it's right or wrong, let's put that to the side for the moment. But you said, there was clearly defined roles. Men did this, women did this. So we both sides, no, I shouldn't say sides, both people knew what they were to do.
And I think we need to, as a society, we need to probably rethink that whole strategy, but still within our own ecosystem. Work it out what it is that your role is within your family. And I was saying before we came on air that part of my upbringing was as a result of migrant families, and both my parents are Hungarian. And when I grew up, when I was observing my parents, they were very respectful of each other. The way that they spoke to each other. My father was a lawyer in Hungary, but he couldn't practice law in Australia. So, I would see him speaking intelligently and then turn up in a set of overalls, right? And that was confusing to me, right? What the hell? Right? And then I would go, then we would watch TV. And for those who are old enough, the Jackie Gleason show where the husband was so disrespectful of his wife, forget what it was, I'm going to Alice,
bangs them straight to the moon or something.
Yeah, it's like, what? And then when I went to, grew up and became an adolescent and got exposed to different societal groups or, different demographics and saw people behaving differently, I just couldn't ever associate or assimilate with that model of, the burly man.
Yeah.
It just never sat well with me.
Yeah.
I'm a man, I'm a masculine, and I believe I'm of that nature, but I couldn't understand why men were behaving in such a disrespectful way to women.
Yeah.
And so, and I think now the pendulum has probably swung way over to the other side. And now if you're a man and you stand up in a room as a woman, enters, it's all of a sudden, how dare you, condescend to, well, no, it's just a sign of respect. Right.
Yeah.
And so, it's confusing, right? It's confusing. What do we do?
Yeah, you see, because it seems to fit that because that's why I said, I wasn't saying whether it was right or wrong, but using that older methodology. I remember watching the Dick Van Dyke Show, and you talk about it's different from the Jackie Gleason show in the sense there was a lot of respect there. There was very defined roles, and again, we're not saying those roles are right, but the roles were very defined, and there was a lot of respect for each other from both the husband and wife in that show. But there were very defined roles, and maybe because now we're mixing the roles, whereas it was okay, the man went to work and the woman took care of the house. Now both people can do that, and as they should. Everyone should have the right to choose what's right for them. But the fact that we don't have those clearly defined roles, does it come back to maybe people have not worked out how to decide what's right for them and then hold on to that? Maybe, do you think we need a bit more training around that? Is that something that could help?
Yeah, because as you were talking, it's like you said, we need to have, clear, defined roles, right? And now we did have those, and now we don't necessarily, and we, there's this confusion. I don't know, is being a mother at home, looking after your children at home, is that a bad thing? I know when Deb and I, we've had 4 children. We made a conscious choice, a decision, that Deb would stay home, at least in the kids' informative years, and look after those children. Now that was a cost to Deb, right? Yeah. Because obviously it was her, it was her emotional connections. She gave up a career. There were some sacrifices that she made there, and on the other side of the ledger, there were sacrifices that I made. About not necessarily being at every school function that the kid had. I made every effort that I could. And my son was talking to me the other day about this, because he's going through, he's a young 24, 25-year-old, and he's got a relationship, and he's living, he's got a long distance relationship, and they're trying to work themselves out. And I just said to him, the sacrifice that he's making now because of this, separation, if you like, between the two. I said, life is a sacrifice. You do make compromises. You can't always be selfish, and you can't always be selfless, right? Yes. But it's the communication that you have between each other, that you talk these things through, and that you agree, right? And I think the challenge then becomes when one side or the other decides that they are right and it will be this way.
Interesting. Yeah, because that's interesting. You mentioned that one side says it's right. You've lost that communication, and drawing from what sounds like your parents were like, they had the respect that you talked about, because you mentioned that they very much respected each other. So it sounds like they considered what was important for the other person before making a decision. Is that?
Yeah, well, I wasn't privy to all of their conversations,
no,
but my recollection, the feeling that I had when we were growing up, it was a loving environment, and I think that's the first thing, right? So if you are in a toxic environment or a toxic relationship, you really have to work hard at working on that, and the kids consequence, their collateral damage if you don't get that right. And I get that it's hard to do, right? And I get that not every relationship can resolve itself, not like every friendship can resolve itself when it breaks down. But I think you have to have some intent around that.
What about
communication?
Yeah. What about from your parents' perspective? I want to look at that and kind of looking at what is manly, and look at your dad, for example. Now, you said your dad was a lawyer, which is, a high profile, very respectful to some people, very respectful job. And then he's come here and he wasn't able to do that. So from his perspective, when we look at, say, ego or that kind of thing kicking in, but it sounds like your dad, was able to have a discussion. Your mum and dad were able to have a discussion, and you said he put on overalls. So he's gone from, a highly respected position, probably, had a lot of influence, to what sounds like laboring and manual labor.
Yep.
I mean, as a man, how do you think that impacted him, or how do you think he addressed it? Because it sounds like he got on and did that, if I'm inferring correctly.
Yeah, he's my hero. And I'll try not to break down and cry, because he gave up a lot, right? And I think sacrifice is a huge thing. So he gave up a lot because he left Hungary. He came from a very well respected family. My mother came from a very wealthy family, right?
Yeah.
And they met post-war, came here. They made a decision early on in our life not to teach us Hungarian, because we were being treated as refugees. Like he could speak Hungarian, German, French, Russian, and he was learning English, and then people would treat him with such disrespect, right?
Wow.
We would walk into stores and people would shout at him saying, "Why can't you effing wog refo, why can't you speak English?"
Yeah.
And so they chose not to teach us Hungarian, because they didn't want us to go to school with an accent and be treated differently from the rest of the group, which is a huge sacrifice if you can think about that.
Yeah.
Because
That's his heritage.
Absolutely. So I can speak Hungarian, but very poorly. It's not my native language. It comes to me with difficulty. So I think that. But he was very stoic. He was very stern. He was very, he had a military background as well. So he was in the military police in the war. That was a very, I was brought up in a very strict environment, loving, strict environment, and that formed me.
It's interesting, because that's what I wanted to explore, that from that perspective, because it sounds like from that perspective, because you mentioned stoic, and we talk about crying as well. And I know there's a lot of ads on TV saying men should cry, boys should cry, and whether they should or shouldn't is the question we're trying to answer here. And you're talking from that perspective. I mean, imagine as your dad. I mean, look at it from that perspective. You come from this very respectful background, to come here and to be treated in that way. I mean, how much respect would he have had for himself if he had just broken down and cried and said, "I can't deal with this," as opposed to, he's obviously raised you. You're very proud of your dad and what he's done for his family. And he's done it with his wife, because you said they had a very respectful relationship. What would that have done for him if he had just gone, "I can't take this anymore," curled up in a corner and cried?
I'm sure that he did.
Yeah.
I'm sure that there were times when he would look at his life, but they were very minor moments of reflection, right? Because when he retired, we did actually have, fortunately, time together before he passed away, where he was helping me renovate my house, my very first home. and we never got any renovation work done. He'd come over and we'd have a cup of coffee, and then we'd do it, half an hour's worth of work, and then we'd sit there and have, some morning tea and lunch, and he would just talk and tell me stories about my uncles and his parentage. And you could see the emotion coming out in him then, when he reflected back and what could have been. I don't think he had any regrets.
Yeah.
Right. So but he was one of that, that stoicism enabled him to just get on with the job. It was like, well, what am I going to do? Am I going to sit around and cry? I could be sad, but I just need. I don't want this to sound like this toxic positivity that people say you just get over it, get on with it, right? Because I think that doesn't help. Right? No. You have to have some empathy or sympathy with somebody, and you have to understand that they are going through emotional situation. Everybody's emotional, right?
Yeah,
it's how you deal with it. I'm just emotional. I go to a movie. I watched Argentina win the World Cup, and as I'm watching it, I'm crying. Right?
I had the same thing when I saw Terminator 2 being put into the lava. It's like
So that's not manly or not manly. That's just Steve Sandor.
Yeah.
And my kids know that's me. That just happens to be. But put me into another environment, and I can be as stoic or I can be as stern.
That's the point I wanted to get to, because it sounds like with your dad, because you said before you're sure he did curl up in the corner and cry at times. Now, I can understand from a dad's perspective, being a dad, and I'm sure you would relate to that as well. It's not something that you'd want your children to see. And I understand why that is, because I'm a dad. I get it. But it sounds like too. I mean, did you have that discussion with your dad as to whether he had talked about that, those times with his wife, or whether he talked about it with friends? Because you don't go through that kind of experience and keep going like your dad did without some kind of support.
Yeah. No, I don't. We didn't. To answer your question, no, we didn't have the question. But it's a bit like, you don't want your kids seeing you curled up in a corner crying. You also don't want your children to experience the arguments that you have with your partner. I'm sure there were times when my mum and dad didn't agree, right?
Yes.
I'm sure there were.
Yeah.
Because they were both very strong and willed people.
Yeah.
We just didn't see it.
Yeah.
Right. There was no point in being demonstrative and demonstrating in front of your children how good you are, or how powerful you are, or how dominant you can be in a situation, unless you are a bully.
Yeah.
Right. And
your parents obviously weren't.
So. No. So a woman can be a bully.
Yeah.
Too,
yeah,
right?
It's not. If you look it up in dictionary, there's no gender applicable.
It's just that a man physically has the ability to threaten a woman because of their size and power, and it's not manly, in my estimation, to dominate somebody just physically from a physical point of view.
Yeah, but you can just inadvertently have that. I've had that experience where just talking normally, because of my size and the tone of my voice, my normal tone, I was told there was a woman that told me that she felt scared by that. I took that on board, and when I was talking to that person in the future, I lowered my tone and was very careful about how I addressed that. But just that physical difference does lead to that.
And you said it there. It's like it's the awareness. So if you go through life not being aware of what is around you, and you just simply are focused on you as an individual, not anyone else, or not your life partner. Let's say if we're talking about that.
Yeah.
If all you are is just simply being selfish in that space, well, then you will do everything that you possibly can to use every tool that you have at your resource to win.
Yeah.
Right? So, and again, that's not manly.
No.
That's like that
Selfish
is
is
so
not manly. Yeah,
well,
it's the
that's so
opposite.
cowardly, right? Like,
Well, yeah,
so
because you're intimidating, using your strength to intimidate someone, and
yeah,
that's. I mean, anyone can step on an ant, for example, to use that as an extreme analogy. That
yeah,
doesn't give you strength.
yeah,
You know,
exactly.
go and
Yeah.
argue with a lion, then you know, see how tough you are.
It's all relative, right? So
Yeah,
you might be 6 foot, but if you come up against this, Shaquille O'Neal, right?
yeah,
He's like 7 foot, right? Well, look
yeah.
out,
Exactly.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
look, not sure where we're going with this, but
Well, it's again coming to that framework and it's trying to understand from your dad's perspective, because again,
mm,
he went through, having a very defined role, and then he lost that role.
mm,
And as you say, and then not only was that, he had a lot of emotional pressure put on him.
mm,
And so how do he deal with it? Because we were talking a little bit about, whether he should cry or not. And I think from my perspective, I'm just wondering whether it was, if he had it curled up and cried in front of his family, and his wife, who's also a strong person, to then him curl up and, I can't deal with this.
mm.
He's probably going to lose a lot of respect from his wife.
Yeah, look, that in those days,
Mm,
potentially it wasn't acceptable to do that, right?
yeah.
And he did, he was very much a solo person. Like he had
Mm,
a lot of friends who were Hungarians who travelled, with them out at the end of the war. So there was
mm,
probably half a dozen or so um, uh, people who we were aunties and uncles
mm,
around that. But my brother has a mental condition at the moment, right? And
mm.
I would hate to think that he would not want to reach out and get help from people
Yeah.
just because it wasn't a manly thing to do,
Yeah, and that's
right?
what I was wondering from your dad's perspective.
Mm.
You might not have seen it, and that's why we probably can't answer that question, was I just get the feeling from the way you talked about him that when he had something that he could either talk to his wife or he had someone that he could talk to. I'm not sure why I've got that feeling, but,
Mm. Yeah, I
um,
look, and I cannot confirm or deny
yeah.
that, but yes, they were very loving. They did talk a lot about a lot of things.
Mm,
They did discuss things like we had 4 kids. He was a mechanic. My mum was ill after she gave birth to my youngest son, so she
your
was
youngest
hospital.
son?
Oh, sorry, my younger brother.
I thought I'd correct that before that went on the internet.
Yeah. My younger brother, and so and he put, yeah, he was a mechanic. He was earning
Mm,
my first year as an apprentice. I was earning more than he was, right? And
wow.
they bought a house,
Mm,
put 2 of my siblings through private school,
mm,
and we went through not private school, but we went to a reasonably good a public school, but we never wanted for anything, right? We never
yeah,
had anything flash, right? There was
yeah.
always we didn't go and buy brand new cars and
Mm,
flash bikes and all the rest of it, and I had to go and work for every penny that I earned because I
yeah.
didn't get pocket money, right?
Mm,
So it was me going out and being a paper boy and pumping fuel at a gas station or service station, etc. So there was a lot of work ethic that was built into that.
yeah,
It's interesting, me as a father, what that formed me and how
mm,
I brought my kids up was very
yeah,
much. It's funny you go, I don't want to be like my dad,
mhm,
um, but, because it was a very strict
yeah,
environment that we lived in. So I could see that in this current age that
mhm,
it was quite, you know, if you were that strict with everybody, right,
mhm,
with your children, that it didn't fit into the environment that we were in. It's a little bit more freer,
mhm,
um, and so we Deb and I did speak a lot about how we would bring the children up, right,
yeah,
and I think again, we're just coming. I think we're circling back onto this. It
yeah,
is the communication between the communication is the key.
It sounds like that, and we're just about out of time for the radio part of this show. But the key takeaways I got from what you were saying, if we're putting a framework around it, was one, respect. So for manly is being respectful, having the ability to communicate, and it sounds like too there's an element of being able to be stoic when you need to be, but having flexibility to, if you do need to get help, as you're talking about with your brother, having the actual courage to go and ask the right people for help. Might not be, having a big emotional session in public, but finding the right people to seek help from. Is that?
Yeah. And I think if we change the language to, and it's not courageous.
Yeah.
It doesn't take courage to go and ask for help.
Yeah, good point.
If that's the tension. It
feels like it for a lot of people, but it really, it's not. I mean, that's what I've noticed in my life. I ask people for help all the time, and people are so generous and want to help you.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So here we are, frightened that somewhat. I think the thing is that what will, I think for men, it's when you ask for help in that way that some men don't know how to handle it because it's never happened to them, right? They would, what do you mean you need help, right?
Yeah.
And that's where just non-judgmental, don't change the subject and start talking about the football, right? Actually be interested in that this person is reaching out for help. And, how many times have you heard, it's like, I spoke with Bill and then 3 days later he committed suicide, right?
Yeah.
It's like, well, just listen. If someone comes to you,
that comes back to the communication part, doesn't it? We need to communicate. So we're going to have to end it here for the radio listeners. Radio listeners, we're going to have to wind up because we've run out of time, but we will continue this conversation in long form on the podcast. So if you want more of this, tune in onto the podcast and we'll see you there. And continuing on for the podcast listeners, we're still back talking about communication. So
yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? That when the what you think is the manly thing to do is to be stoic. There's a lot of. You
said though about the listening, as from a manly perspective, because I know from my perspective, if someone comes to me with a problem, unless I've got something to do and I say, look, I can't do it now, but come back, and I do the same. I've done the same with my son. I'll give him a lot of time, but then there's things I'm doing, and also when he wants something, I say, I've got to finish this. I'll come back to you later. But do you think that's part of that communication we need to be having? Is saying to the men, it's not so much, well, he's asking for help, but also too, when someone asks for help, teaching us, as a framework for being manly, being able to listen.
Yeah, it's a key, isn't it? Having the respect for that person. So, let's go back. Let's say it is unbelievably courageous for someone to be able to open up in front of their peers, and at the risk of being judged, because there is always that risk, So you open up, you're not feeling great, you go to someone who you respect, who maybe is your best friend, and then all they do is say, "What are you talking about? Just get over it, get on with it," right? And that's that's not toxic positivity, but it's like, I don't understand because I don't know. I don't want to go.
You need a new friend would be my thing.
Yeah, well, exactly. Well, maybe
if you go to a friend and say, I've got a problem, and they say, come and watch the footy.
Yeah,
it's like,
but that might be their way of coping. That might be their mechanism for coping with it, right? So they're going, I don't know.
Well, that's the point I'm coming back to: is do we need to have this more training about, or more education about how to listen when someone comes to you and says, "Hey, I've got a problem."
Yeah, and I think that's happening, isn't it, out there? I was watching, I'm a rugby league fan. Sorry for those of you who played the aerial ping pong. I'm just alienated.
And for the global listeners, they're going, what are these two on about?
But I was listening to a interview. I don't remember his name, but he's a South Sydney front row forward. And he was talking about how he was affected by alcohol, right? So he would tell everybody that I'm okay, he'd go home, and he wasn't okay. Yeah. Right. So he had an alcohol addiction. I I interviewed on my podcast Dave Shillington, who is a ex-Australian rugby league player, played for the Maroons in Queensland, was with the eastern suburbs with the Roosters, and Freddie Fittler was his coach, right?
Yeah.
And Freddie saw something in him once and said, "Are you okay?" And, Dave's this big 6 foot plus, burly. Yes, of course I'm okay.
Yeah.
And then Freddie took him aside a little bit later and said, it's okay. I've got someone who I go and speak to. I'm not emotionally fraught, right? I just like to get things off my chest every once in a while.
Yeah.
So he went to a psychologist, right? And Dave went to that psychologist, all reserved, not wanting to share too much with him. And then, an hour and a half later, the guy's saying to him, "Mate, I've got another appointment. You better leave." Now, Dave is actually working in that space. He's working in that men's health, wellness, mental wellness in that space. And so I think that whole, that stereotyping of the burly male who, is tough, and that's how they should be, and you can't be anything other than that. Well, that's not the truth, right? The truth is that you can be that, right, and perform in that role if that's what it requires at that time. But you can also be sensitive to the environment around you. You can also be self-aware of yourself and ask for help if you need to. Like every sports person's got a coach. Well, why wouldn't you have a mental coach?
Well, that's the point, and I love what you've said there. Is you have the ability to talk about things when you need to talk about them. And so it's something I've never really related to much, because when I've had a problem, I've generally found someone to say, "Hey, I've got this issue, how do I deal with that?" And I credit my mum for some of the upbringing that I got for that, to be able to do that. So that always confused me a little bit, but also to mainly, I think, because I was the way I was, similar, you talked about before how you weren't, you didn't quite fit in, but no doubt you found people you fit in with because you were similar. Well, that was my upbringing as well. The people I was associated with, we could talk about things. We didn't all the time. We didn't sit around and have, chin wags and talk about, all different issues we had. But if we had an issue, we could talk about it. And we were okay to talk about it. And that's where I was wondering from that perspective as well, is it, because that was my take on it, is most of the time that there is that kind of stoicism there going, I'm just going to deal with this and keep pushing forward. I've got a struggle, I'm going to keep pushing forward. But when it got to a point, there was a point going, this is affecting me, I need help here. And there was a difference, I think. Do you think it's a difference between complaining and seeking advice? Because from a man's perspective, if we're perceived as complaining about a situation, that's not manly. But if we've got a problem, we should be able to talk about it. Do you think that's something part of this mix? I can see you smiling. You're looking at it. For the listeners, you like had this excited thing, like, "Oh, I want to go there. I want to go there."
Yeah, it's funny, isn't it, that men always want to solve the problem.
Yeah.
There's a great. I in my leadership program, I use this example. Managers try to solve the problem of their staff.
Yeah.
Right. And really, what they should be working towards is helping the staff solve the problem for themselves.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And the example I use is, a husband comes home from work and says to his wife, "How was your day?" And she goes, "Well, little Johnny, he didn't get his homework done, so the teacher called me aside when I picked him up this afternoon. And, this is the third time he hasn't been able to get his homework done. And nearly ran out of fuel on the way home, and I had to go to two different grocers because the grocer that I went to first, didn't have the stuff that we needed for dinner. And then the husband goes, well, I've told you, to work with Johnny, and I can help you with that, blah, blah, blah. And how many times have I told you to go and get fuel on your way, in the morning, and you should have checked, blah, blah, like he's like, she goes, I didn't want advice. I was telling you what my day was like. I didn't want to solve the problem. So I think men, so this is why I was laughing, because I think men, we naturally want to help, and we think helping is solve the problem.
Yeah.
And so therefore we don't listen. We're thinking, as you're telling me your problem, right? Rather than listening and just absorbing and waiting for you to then either ask for advice or just sit there in that silence, and allow that to just sit. Instead, what we do is we automatically, halfway through your problem, I've already got 3 solutions and can't wait for you to finish talking so that I can tell you how good I am, it's with good intention. I understand that.
No, we didn't put that framework up, but the framework that we approach with all this is that I believe most behaviour, nearly all behaviour, is with good intention.
Yes. Yeah. So,
does that come back to? Sorry, you go first.
No, that's all right.
I was going to say, because you mentioned before about if a guy goes to another guy and says, I've got this problem, because they're a bit worried about whether they're going to be accepted or not. So they've mustered it up and they've gone and asked another guy. The other guy says, don't worry about it. Do you think it's because that's how they deal with problems? Because, there's a story about men. That's why men like fishing, because we go to men. I remember Mark Gungor is a pastor that talks about this, he talks about the tale of two brains and says men have what's called a nothing box. It's how we solve problems. We just don't think about it. We go and do something like fishing, don't even put a worm on there because we just want nothing, because through that silence, that's why I turned into Forrest Gump. I go up and down the lawn with my push. No, it's not push. It's a self-propelled mower. That's my thinking time where I can just find solutions to the problems I've got. But do you think that might be where we need to have that conversation with men, is saying, okay, if someone does come to you with a problem, there might be a little bit more investigative questioning before you say, okay, you fix it by going to your nothing box.
Yes. I'm not a fisherman, but I know what happens when you go fishing is that nothing's happening, right?
We had that with a friend of mine. He took us out fishing and we chartered a boat and went out, took myself, my son, his son, we went out, and that always had great thing. We never caught nothing. He was so embarrassed. He was just felt so bad about the whole thing because we didn't catch a thing.
It's the experiences. I just on that, I did take my boys and my youngest daughter to Papua New Guinea. They came up and we went fishing. We were on a 40-foot boat, 50 kilometres off the Bay of Milne Bay, and we caught thick. No, what's the name of them? Spanish mackerel, 6 Spanish mackerel, a wahoo, and something else.
So you're doing that with your children?
Yeah, sorry?
You're doing that with your children?
Yes, yeah. One of the Spanish mackerels was bigger than Joe. He was 8 or 9 at the time, and it weighed 20-something kilos. So, yeah.
So do you want to go there with from that perspective of being manly? What is manly? With your, when you look at being a dad, how do you, when you went on that trip, were you thinking about, what example you're setting or how you were presenting yourself as a man? Have you consider or reflecting on that, or do you want to go there or not go there?
So I would travel back from Papua New Guinea to Australia, and so this was a Christmas where the kids came up and was with me for 2 weeks, 10 days, and it was more about me showing them where I'd been for the last 4 or 5 years. Okay. It was sharing that, and then going out in and around the places where we lived, and gave them that experience. They were relatively young, and I think Joe was, as I said, he was probably about 10, maybe a little bit older, and Tom's 2 years older than him.
Mm.
Yeah, it was more bonding because of the situation that we had, where I wasn't there around them. The interesting thing, because this does have relevance to it, is whilst I wasn't there in initially when I first went to Papua New Guinea, and Deb and I had divorced, right? So that and I had the kids for 2 weeks, and she had the kids for 2 weeks. The 2 weeks that I wasn't there, there was behavioural issues because I wasn't there.
Yeah.
Right. And so Deb, obviously the trauma of the divorce, even though we had, and I've spoken about this with you before, it was, it was a beautiful divorce. I
know, I've never heard those two words. That's an oxymoron.
Yeah,
beautiful divorce, but from the way you've described it, you've done very well.
never easy to have, right? So it wasn't that it was this beautiful thing that we coasted our way through. It was difficult, because every breakup of a relationship is difficult, right? There's you go, where am I going to go? What am I going to do? How am I going to live? What's going to happen with the kids? What's my future look like? What does their future look like? All of that, right? So you feel some responsibility in that, right? And so there's guilt there, definitely. We just happen to have a really strong relationship in terms of our emotional intelligence. Our communication had broken down. Our ability to communicate had broken down, which eventually ended up in us not being able to communicate, and that eventually we, even after 12 months of counselling, we just said no, that we love each other, but we're just not in love with each other. But
was that coming back to that respect that you had from when you were younger, that you decided, okay, that was innate from you, and so from being a man, you just said, okay, we're not going to communicate, and you've together, but you've actually respected that this is not going to work. Is that?
I would love to take credit for it.
Yeah.
But seeing as this is public,
I want to touch on that. Then you brought that up. Is that part of being a man, being able to go, hey, put that ego aside?
Well, the interesting thing is, I didn't know that there was a problem until there was a problem.
Right.
So I was, again, we were communicating. I knew there was something wrong, because we weren't communicating as much as we were. There was financial pressure on us, which obviously always creates a problem, particularly if your values are different, right? And so there's that. But we managed to work our way through some of that. But I was either I was in denial, which is more likely the case, because I didn't want to confront the reality of not being together.
Yeah.
Right. And it just got to a point where it was just not. It was not a pleasant environment to be in. And Deb reached out to a friend of ours who was a marriage counsellor, and started to have some sessions with her, and then told me that she was having sessions with Diane. And I went, what for? Right? What's the problem? And that's when it was like, oh no, wow, okay, there is a problem there.
Yeah.
And then that's when pride comes into it. There's definitely anger. There's ego. How is what I'm providing for the family. How I can't do any more than I'm possibly doing. What more do you want from me, right?
Yeah.
And it was me being closed down and not communicating. It wasn't Deb.
Yeah.
Right. It was me that didn't do that. And even with all of the emotional intelligence training that we'd done together, even that, the pressure of what we were doing at the time caused me to go back into the, fight or flight. I'm here I'm the master of the house. My job is to bring in the cash. My job is to provide for the family. That's what I'm doing. That's what I'm focused on, and everything else, can take a back seat.
How do you think taking what you know now, it's always easy, hindsight's always 2020. But taking what that, and with the framework of being manly, because we look at that before it was, again, we go back to that. I was looking at using that Dick Van Dyke Show example. The man went to work and the woman stayed home. And if there was that finance, issue there, then it was pretty clear that was your job to go to work and do that. Whereas you're now in this back, you're not in that show, you're in here real life in what you are living, and you guys were having issues, so that there wasn't that communication. Where do you think, in hindsight, what would be your advice if someone was in that same situation? Here's a framework for being manly. This is a way to address that.
I would say awareness.
Yeah.
If what you're doing in your life is busy, then you don't have time. That makes that seems obvious, right?
No,
but if all you're doing is filling up gaps in your day because you don't want to face reality, and maybe you're just busy, right? Maybe you've just got stuff that you need to get done. But potentially there is also the I don't want to face reality, because if I stop and have time to reflect and awareness, then reality actually does show up for me.
I love that, and that, because I went to write down awareness and then realized that I'd wrote it before because you'd said that before. And which circles back to this communication that you've mentioned before. So when we're looking at this framework for what is manly, this self-awareness of what's going on, going, okay, we're really busy here. Not only that, I'm scared because of I might not be able to fulfill my role. I provide for if that's, whether that's your role or not. But in this context, it was the role to be the provider. You and Deb had talked about that, and that was what you both had chose. And then you're feeling you're saying there's financial pressure, which means that role isn't being fully fulfilled. And so you're going, okay, I don't know. And so you're not wanting to stop. And it's that what you're talking about here is having that awareness. Is it also having a safe space to be able to open up?
Yeah. And I think, it's that fear of reality, right?
Yeah.
So if I stop, and I actually face what's really going on, my ego is going to be damaged because I now feel as though I'm not good enough. All of those things start to come into your head. And I was having a conversation with someone today, and I just feel that we are far too hard on ourselves as a human being. We're always looking to, how can we do things better? I'm not as good as the other person. There's this comparison between, why are you comparing yourself to somebody else? Why are you not just being in the moment where you are? And it may be shit, right? Where you are right now may be the worst possible situation that you're in. Like my father, when he lost the war, right? He was on the losing side of the war. Lost his everything that he owned. They had 2 suitcases, and when they left Germany, they had 2 kids. And he arrived in Australia with that. Total life's possessions. Lost everything. No job, no family, no support, nothing, right? And it's at that moment where you actually get to not see what you're made of, but it's at that moment where you make a decision and you go, is this the worst thing that can possibly happen to me? Or is this just a lesson in life that I can learn from and move forward?
Yeah.
And so it's, for me, it's perspective, right? So if you just take as a man, right, your job is to look after the family. So is it your partner's job to look after the family.
Whatever the roles are within that, when you say job to look after the family, you could be a stay-at-home dad.
Exactly.
So it doesn't matter what the role is. As a parent, male or female, you feel a responsibility to look after the family, whatever that role is.
Yep. And if you're a child, if you're not a parent and you're a single person, it's your responsibility to be a good person.
Yeah.
In and around your friends, be there for the friend that needs you at the time, right? I mean, I want to circle back a little bit because you talked about, when a man goes to another person or another man and asks for advice, is that person then not listening to them, or what? How do we help the man to become a better listener? I think sometimes it's the choice of person that you actually go to too. So, if you go to somebody and you just know that they've got that's not who they are, right? they're the guy who, if you want to go to the pub on a Friday night, they're the guy that you go with. They're the guy that you play football with. They're the guy that you go fishing with. If you get D&M with that person, they're just going to be superficial.
Yeah.
Right? They're just going to wash over it with some joke or something like that.
Yeah.
So you're expecting an outcome from somebody who is just not going to give that to you. So if you want to go and have a laugh, right, because you think, have a laugh and, let's enjoy ourselves, not go and get pissed and, drown your sorrows in and, do something silly. But, if you want to go and have some fun with somebody, if you think that they're the person that does that, great. Seek out somebody who is, I guess, more sensitive to the awareness of their own fallibilities, or however you want to describe that.
Yeah.
And seek that person out. And in some cases, maybe the only person that does that is a professional, right?
Yeah.
And there is no harm in seeking out professional help.
I think, for me, manly is, if you need help, having the ability to ask for help. That doesn't mean you exactly like you say, you choose who you ask carefully. I've always asked for help, but I've always been very careful as to who I'm asking for help. When I've wanted business advice, I would actually go and find these really wealthy people. I'd send them a letter saying, "Can I ask you some questions?" It's amazing. They'd say yes. I was like, and if I was having some other issues and if I needed professional help, I went and got professional help. And I said I never had a problem asking for help. So that's why I was always confused by that. And as by virtue, people I associated with did the same thing.
Yep.
So that having that ability to listen, I love that you circled back to that, because to me, it's something that I've been focusing on for a number of years. And someone said to me once about, how in a conversation you're always thinking about what someone else is about to say or what you're about to say as opposed to what they're saying. And I took that on board. And this year I ramped it up a whole new level. And it's amazing how different it has made a whole bunch of conversations that I know that are different now, because I'm actually listening even more than I was. I thought I was listening. It reminded me of listening about there was a Toastmaster champion. He had just won the world championships in Toastmasters, and a friend was flying home with him. And as they were getting on the airport, he goes, "Just a minute, I want to get a book for reading on the plane." He bought a book on public speaking. I said, "Well, what do you?" He goes, "Well, you can always be better." And that's the approach that I've had with listening, and it's amazing how powerful that is. And I'm just wondering, from that perspective, do we need to add that into the framework and going, okay, we need to not only listen to other people, but listen to ourselves. This awareness that you mentioned before. Is that something we need to have in the framework for what is manly?
Yeah, I love that. It's like, be interested, not interesting. So it's that whole, I'm really engaged in the moment with you, and I care about that. So but that self-awareness, right, is when, and I don't know that that's necessarily an innate thing that is in our DNA, natural in our DNA.
Right. Okay.
I think you actually have to work at that.
Yeah.
Because if you think about our makeup, right? We are our operating system is probably about 150 years behind where it needs to be able to deal with the environment that we're in.
Right.
Like,
okay.
So everybody talks about, the brain and the various lizard brains and, where we are and, the fact that we're living, we have this fight or flight mentality. The subconscious is designed to, remember things so that we can, remember where the food is. So the next time we go out hunting, right, we can remember where that particular herd was or where that particular plant was and all the rest of it, right? Now you walk out you walk 5 meters and there's a fridge there and it's got all the food that you need, right?
Exactly.
You don't need to remember.
A lot of it you don't need, but it's there.
Exactly. And that's the problem, right? So it's like the body is consuming all this food.
Yeah.
That it doesn't need because the body's saying you never know when you're going to need that, right?
Yeah.
It's like, well, I'll never need it, right? Because I'll need it when I need it. So I think, and that's confusing, right? That's confusing. So I'm not sure where I'm going with this, but it's
we're coming back to this framework of what is manly and awareness. Yeah. And you're saying that the brain is a little bit behind, but is it also too because we've got so much information, we're bombarded with so much, and to be aware you really need to be quiet? Is it?
Yes, that was I was when you asked that question, about the listening. I think silence is an absolutely powerful tool for you as an individual. I was on in a group session the other day, and one of the presenters was talking about conscious awareness, which is a fascinating subject. And basically, one of the exercises that she spoke of is to actually go out, and you can do this walking between the front door and your car, right?
Yeah.
But it's actually stopping and allowing the environment for you to be aware of the environment around you. So it's listening. It's listening to just stopping and listening to and feeling your body, where your feet are on the ground, what the bones and flesh and the sun on your skin and all the rest of it. And it just centers you. It gives you this quietness. And it's a bit like this, mindfulness where, you're doodling. And I think, silence is a huge thing.
Do you think we need to, like, from that perspective, and it's kind of, for me, it's a bit of a rhetorical question because I did it, but turn things off? I mean, my phone, and I noticed that today because I was expecting a call, and I didn't want to miss it, so I turned my phone from silent to ringing, and it felt uncomfortable when it rang because my phone has been on silent for so long. And when I say silent, it doesn't bing for anything. When I look at my screen, it doesn't have little things saying there's X amount of messages you've got here. It has nothing like that. So I don't know what's going on, what people are trying to contact me, how many contact me. My email is the same way. My computer doesn't bing. Some of my clients do, which is annoying because they've got the setup where you can't turn it off. So when I have to use their computer, I kind of have my computer nearby and I'm using that rather than theirs. I have the sound turned off so I can't hear any bings. But I've noticed from my perspective, that made a massive difference in my life. One, because I wasn't being reactive, but also two, in my ability just to stay focused on what I was doing without being distracted. So I feel it gave me an ability to have that quiet time. Do you think, these are simple steps that we should be encouraging people to do?
Well, let me ask the question: did the world fall around,
It actually got a lot easier.
Yeah, exactly. So
it got easier because a lot of the crap that you get binged with, you don't need to deal with. Certainly not in that moment.
Yeah, distracting. There's a great the Pomodoro model, I don't know, or technique, where you turn everything off for 25 to 30 minutes, and you just focus on one task and get that task done. And at the end of that task, you rate yourself out of 10 as how focused were you. Yeah. And it's not, and so basically sometimes it's like, oh, I wasn't very focused. I was maybe a 4 or a 5 because I got halfway through and made a cup of tea, or I was looking at my phone, even though you turn all notifications off, right? Yeah. Everything off, close your door, put a sign up if you're in an open thing, tell the kids or family that, that you're doing this. Yeah. You got to pick a right time for it, obviously. but and at the end of that period, you go, I was a 6, and the goal is to be a 7 next time, or an 8. Yeah. And so occasionally you end up in that zone where you get so much done because there are no distractions and you're on that roll. The sportsmen talk about being in the zone. They don't remember the shots or the game that they played in because they were so focused on that. There's a lot in that. There's a lot in that.
You've brought that up from a corporate perspective, because in the exceptional effort program that we have, part of it, one of the modules is max time, and it's how to do that. And one of the things I work on with corporates is turn everything off, turn those alerts off. Now, only a couple of companies actually fully do it, but it's amazing the culture shift it makes when they do that. Yeah. And their staff are not reactive, but actually proactive.
Yeah.
Amazing.
It's amazing how, we get attached to that, right? I mean, we did some work with an organization and it was like, I don't know whether it was a turn off Tuesday or something like that. And so, on that particular day, we didn't we didn't do it for the whole day to start with. We just said, for an hour, between 8 o'clock and 9 o'clock, turn all your emails off, turn your, notifications off. If you need to go and have a conversation with someone, get up and walk over to them, or give them a phone, a phone call or something. So this was digital interruption. It wasn't necessarily communication. Yeah. It made a huge difference. And then eventually, what happened was that it expanded to, 2 hours, 3 hours, 4 hours. And then we were having trouble to getting them to turn it back on again. But their efficiency went through the roof for that period of time. Yeah.
Well, the companies I've worked with that have implemented that, the efficiency went through the roof. Yeah. And it wasn't, no one missed out on anything. If there was something urgent, you've always got a way to reach the person. Majority of stuff, and they talk about the 80-20 rule. I think with communication, I think it's a 99-1 rule. Yeah. 1%, and probably is even lower than that is actually urgent, that must be dealt with right there and then. And if it does, you can reach the person you need to other ways. Yeah. And it's amazing. And that's where I was wondering, when you were talking about this awareness, simple things that people can do, that guys can do. I mean, it applies, I think it applies equally to women, but we're talking about what is manly here. But a manly thing to do is set this framework where you're in charge of your time. You're not at beck and call, every little beep, and turning around going and dealing with that.
And again,
I know it applies to both sexes, but
and again, I think that be respectful. So be respected and respectful. So if that's what you're going to do, then let people know that this is the period of time, that I'm going into my man cave. Right. So I'm going into my office, or I'm going into the garage, or I'm going into the shed, or I'm going to work on the car, or I'm I'm going to go play football with my mates, or I'm going down. This is the me time, but you've communicated it, and there's a purpose behind it because you've discussed why you need that done in your life, right? Yeah. But I did an exercise, just if we could bring it back a little bit to corporate, but if you
There's men's in corporate, it's fine.
Yeah. But it's just that interruption. So if you get interrupted 20 times a day, right, and that's just such a low bar, right? Yeah. And each time you get interrupted, you take your focus away from what it is that you were working on, and you focus on the interruption, and then you come back that whole exercise takes about 2 to 3 minutes because you've lost focus.
Yeah.
You go over there and you spend 60 seconds looking, at some image from Betty, and Betty just happened to be pregnant, so it's probably a photo of the baby, so, goo goo gaga, right, I better get back to work, right? And then you come back here and you focus, and then it takes you 30 seconds to refocus, find your place again, and you start. If you do that 20 times a day, right, 5 times a week, 48 times a year, it works out to about 1,600 hours, which is about 2 weeks
you've just lost
of lost time. And I say that's a holiday.
Yeah.
And it doesn't take a lot to be like that, right? And you don't have to change your character. So again, with men at home, again, it's that communication. I need this space.
Well, I was going to say, from that perspective, using that and it's a respect thing as well. I have that from my perspective. It's interesting how I don't have alerts and I don't know when emails come in, yet I will respond to everyone. Unless I have to do a little bit of research to do the respond, but usually it's within 24 hours of getting an email. Yet I know other people that don't do that don't respond to people for a week, but they've looked at it probably several times and lost that time. But I'm just wondering, from this awareness thing, for me, following that steps has given me great awareness of what's going on around me. It's often, and you've said this in an interview because we've had a number of discussions, you're able to pick up on things, because I have this all the time where I'll be listening to someone and I'll say, I understand this is going on. They're going, they hadn't said it, but I've picked up on it from what they've said, because now I've got that awareness, because I've shut all this other stuff off that enables my brain to be a bit quieter and focus on the other person. And I think that's a respect thing as well. When we're talking about a framework of being manly, it's like, I will be respectful enough to listen and give you devoted time. But not only that, I've trained myself so I can actually listen more intently.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm being a bit evangelistic with that.
No, I understand what you're saying. Because there are some really basic human principles in all of this. And if you're not, the people who are listening to this are more likely to be open to this. And I think it's incumbent upon us and the listeners to, if we really believe that there's some value in making this place a better place for us all, right? To spread the word a little bit, right? You don't have to be an evangelist.
It's surprising. I was going to say, I think it's surprising how many people actually want to have the conversation if you give them the safe space. I've walked around many construction sites, revealed something vulnerable about me, and all of a sudden 20 men have opened up.
Yep.
So touching on what you're saying, I think what you're saying is right. We need to have that conversation.
Yep, and that's leadership, isn't it? It's that whole point of if you lead from the if you demonstrate that it's there's a couple of pieces there. One, you demonstrate vulnerability is not a weakness.
Yeah,
right? It's that you don't have all the answers. Empathy.
I never said that. I'll find the answer. I might not know it right now, but I'm not going to tell you that.
Empathy. I've walked in your I've not walked in your shoes, but I understand what you're going through. And so when you open up, and then it enables people to then open up if they know that it's a safe place there.
Well, I had that experience where, referring back to Mark Gungor again, I used to walk around and I'd show, there's a video he has called Tale of Two Brains. You can look, for listeners, look it up on YouTube. It's very funny, but explains how men and women think. And one time stood out, because I used to do it as a bit of an icebreaker as well, gets people to laugh and a good way to open up and people connect. After this conversation, and some of the listeners will have heard this story before, but everyone left except this one guy, massive, burly, tattoos, biker on steroids. But he was almost bawling his eyes out. And I'm like, and I was, and he come over and he said, I don't know what to do. And he opened up that him and his wife are having all these marriage problems. And he said, well, he loved his wife. And I said, well, I'll send you the link to the full video of the Laugh Your Way to a Better Marriage that Mark Unger has. Someone's put up on YouTube. And I said, watch it where she's going to, walk past, she's going to walk past and she's going to ask what you're watching and say, look, I love you. I don't, friends said to watch this because it might help work out. And if she's interested, she'll watch with you or whatever. And if not, don't worry, just pick up whatever you can. 2 months later, I bumped into him. Apparently they'd turned back into teenagers where they're trying to get the kids off so they can go and have sex somewhere. That came about because, I think I showed a little bit of vulnerability, which enabled him to have a safe space. And that's why I'm wondering, this manly space, is being manly creating a safe space around you that people can be vulnerable?
What I heard there was, yes, the vulnerability enabled the opportunity for that person to come and open up to you.
Yeah.
But the real gift there was the care that you took to provide him with a solution that you listened, and then you cared enough to go, hey, listen, this might help, and you gave some instructions along the way, right? So again, I think
care was the word that stood out for me there.
Yeah, and we start to get,
I think all men care.
Yeah, and I think the higher, like what we're doing is we're just moving up the food chain of emotional intelligence, and at the top of it, it's love, right? So it's love for yourself, it's love for somebody else, which is another
You're
form
going real deep here. I love it.
Yeah, and I think at a societal level, and it's certainly coming into the boardrooms, in corporates, where it's now becoming okay to talk of love, love of the business, love of of yourself, love of
go ahead, sorry.
Love of your compatriots. I always joke when I'm doing the leadership programs, I talk about value, because you can't say love. I love you because the HR department's going to come along and slap you with a lawsuit because of sexual harassment, right? Well, screw that, right?
Yeah.
No, I actually care for you, right? Now, I don't. You can say I'd love being around you, or I love that you do that, right? And we love what we do, and that. And we love ourselves, and we want you to love yourself, and that's that safe space, that creating. It's unfortunate that some families don't have there are some families that live in difficult situations, and there is no ability to break the neck or a nexus between one intergenerational. So that the way that you spoke to disrespectfully to you saw your father speaking disrespectfully to your mother, so that was okay to speak disrespectfully to the girl down the street. And I think there's some ads on TV that talk about that. It's not okay. A young boy.
Well, it's not okay either way. It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
It's disrespectful. It's not gender specific.
So it's it's not okay for a young boy to pick on a young girl, right? It might be in jest and play, but it's not okay, right? And that's just respect, right?
Yeah.
Whether it's a boy or a boy on boy, girl on girl, boy on girl, girl on boy, it doesn't really matter. It's like you need to behave. And unfortunately, there are families that don't have that ability, and that's where I think we're privileged, we're fortunate, and I know the work that you do, some of the work that you do in Share.care, is trying to enable people to break out of that particular
it's so much more
situation.
powerful. I mean, and I really am latching onto that word because I think it is powerful. I think to show caring for someone as opposed to belittling them gives you more power in any situation. It gives you more respect from people observing it. It gives you more ability to create a relationship that could be beneficial to you. it's so much more powerful to show care for someone. I feel like He-Man.
except if what has served you to date has been is working in a space of fear.
Well, that's what I'm saying, and it's that not being aware of that, and that's part of sharing that. Going, hey, you've done it this way, which got a result.
Yep.
But
how's that going for you?
Not a great result.
Yeah, how's that?
And probably not serving you very well in the wider world.
Exactly.
Whereas here's an alternative that is going to get you better results in the moment and more respect for yourself, so you actually feel better about yourself. And because this is not something from that perspective, it's not something you can change. It's chemicals in your body will be produced. If you put someone down, you don't get a dopamine hit, that kind of thing. You get other chemicals and stuff like that. You care for someone and show you care for someone, you will get this amazing, and a friend of mine called it the giver's high. And he'd used drugs as, some heavy drugs. And he said, the high that I got from taking drugs doesn't even come close to the giver's high. It just sets, and not only that, you don't have a downer. It's not like you have a downer. So it makes you feel good. It just, there's so many other benefits, and that's the conversations that we're having now to share that out. And certainly from my perspective, as much as possible, I share that. And I've recently pulled up a family member because of the behavior that wasn't right. It was just, that's not acceptable. You can't do. I'm slightly on a different topic there, but it was, if you're going to operate, you need to operate from a caring perspective.
Yep.
Otherwise, this doesn't work.
Yep. Just a situation. Whilst you were talking, I was thinking, the men that I was trying to find an analogy where it was okay for men to behave in, I guess, a more not aggressive way, but more, air quotes, a manly way. And I thought of the Hells Angels or the Bikies, those types of rugby league groups, the military that you've had a part of, right? Where the whole point of the exercise, right, is to be physical and manly and, bash each other up or compete competitively. But the bond, and it's like, it's that, die for your brother type thing, right? And that's care that is manifesting itself in a different way. I think it's still that. I still think that we can be manly and care. I don't think they're mutually exclusive, and I don't think that's what you were saying.
No, not at all. And that's why we actually wrote that into the code of share. But coming back to the military as well, it was interesting, and I think that's why the way things are as far as the world structure is now, because you go back to it missed generations in classes where they had the warrior type mentality, and where someone failed and they'd commit harikari or do whatever. Whereas I remember in basic training, one of the first things they taught us, they said, you're not here to die for your country. You're not here to do that. You're here to make the other person die for theirs, but you are not here to sacrifice yourself for the country. You're here to make as many people live as possible. Completely different mentality to that. But so I'm digressing a little bit. I want to come back to that because we specifically addressed that in the code, which we revamped the old Knights code for share.care. And we wrote in and I want to separate, for me, I've always wanted to separate violence from oppression because they're two different things. That's why we wrote violence is only permitted on the battlefield, and we put that in quotes, any arena where competition is with two willing participants or teams have engaged. So it's only violence is only permitted on the battlefield with willing opponents to the extent the rules allowed. So because if you took violence out of a rugby match, it'd be pretty boring. But it would be completely unacceptable to tackle someone at a traffic lights on the street.
Yep.
So we're saying, okay,
or without the ball.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, but that's so in that arena, where the rules are allowed, to the extent the rules are allowed. So you don't walk on the rugby field with a shotgun. That's just not, But to the rule, you're allowed to tackle someone. Well, that's violence, but it's in the context, and they're willing opponents that are getting into that arena. And the second criteria, and we specifically wrote to the minimum extent required in self-defense. So yes, if someone is being, and I think the Ukraine war is a great example of that. They're not lobbing missiles back into Russia. They're just defending. And obviously there's probably a resource restriction for that, but I think that's probably beneficial as well. It's a completely different dynamic because if you looked at what happened, go back to World War II, which you relate to that, as soon as Germany the Nazis invaded Poland, Britain declared war and, started attacking Germany, whereas this is a completely different scenario. Obviously there's nukes now too, so there's other parameters which maybe force this hand. But I think it's a good example of we'll defend to the extent like you keep pushing, we're going to push back, but to the extent required to do that. And that was kind of like really when you look at the first Gulf War as well, when they pushed back and they stopped at the border. Okay, well, that's as far as we're going.
Which sort of begs the question of where does testosterone fit into all of this? Because that's a natural male phenomena, isn't it? So that, in that again,
I'm glad you raised that. Because it's on my list of things to talk about. Where does testosterone fit into this?
Yeah. It's or the lack of testosterone, and so the posturing, the way you. And this is where it gets really, really different at a global geopolitical area, right? It's
fundamentally,
who knows
from what I understand, right? Part of the testosterone is part of the sex drive. It's so take that out of the equation, the human race is dead. It's if we're not driven to procreate, then we're in trouble as a race.
Yep.
But is that, and this is where maybe we're taking that step as well. It's like it's understanding the parameters of what you've got in there, because we can put it on the other context and say, okay, and a lot of female friends, whenever they get their period, they get crampy and things like that. Now, and a psychologist put it to me this way. She said, and it was in a completely different context. But she said to me, if someone threw a little pebble at you, just tiny little bit of rice that hit you here, would that affect you? And I'm like, no, it wouldn't. She said, what if they threw 2 or 3? Wouldn't affect me. She said, what if they did it for 3 or 4 days constantly? How would you then react? So when we put it in that context and we look at testosterone, we take that, okay, let's look at it from that perspective. Does this come back to, because I relate to this from martial arts training, because I've done a fair bit of martial arts. My son does it. I know a number of martial arts teachers. And when they talk about it, and we mentioned about the warrior thing, when we go back to what the original warrior was like, one of my friends told me, he's studied this in history, it was the original warrior was a spear that's broken. Means they've got the ability to, but be very rare that they would use that ability. And that came back to, because I was, I'm partly or mostly Polish background, but Ukraine and Russian as well. But I grew up Catholic because, Polish is Roman Catholic. And I always struggled with the quote, "The meek shall inherit the earth," because to me, especially if you read the Bible, I mean, his clothes are draped in, or his robes are draped in blood. That's not a peaceful thing. That's not a meek person that's inheriting anything. And it just seemed juxtaposed. But it was only later that I learned, and I have a friend who's an pastor who lives across the road who confirmed it for me. But from the original Greek, meek actually meant great power under control, not weak. It was someone who has a lot of power but doesn't use it unless absolutely necessary. And this is where I'm running from that testosterone perspective. Is it a case where we go, okay, yeah, it's there for a reason, but part of this framework that we need to have and get back to, because when you go back to like even older framework, if you go back to a gentlemanly framework, a gentleman wouldn't do that, wouldn't behave in an aggressive manner. We kind of lost that a little bit. Is that where we need, is because we're not going to drain testosterone, I would imagine, because I think the human race would die, but maybe someone might come up with that. But
Yeah. Look, I am way out of my league here, but I'm going to, I think context is everything, right? And the environment that we live in is unbelievably different to the context, the environment of, let's say, 500,000 years ago, right?
True.
So interesting thing is that I've been studying, or increasingly becoming more interested in the Mongol and the Genghis Khan era, or the Khan era. And an interesting thing is they used to, on the steppes of Mongolia, they used to fight each other, like the tribes. And so the tribes would, one tribe would come over and rape and pillage. Well, they would pillage rather than rape, right? Against each other. And then they would disappear, and then they would come back. The other one would regroup, and then they'd come back. The interesting thing was that they left the women behind. Right. Because they knew that the marauding opposing group would not kill the women. They would take them as their wives.
Okay.
Right? Now, not a great thing, right?
No.
But the reason
they swipe left or whatever and go, no, and form a line, swipe, go next person, swipe, and it became a hierarchy of the strongest male first.
Yeah, exactly. Well, the reasoning behind it was that the younger men would get on the freshest horses, and ride away, and they would leave the older men on older horses to be caught, right, and probably killed, and the women, right. So just a completely different thing, because the men were the ones who had to then, protect the tribe. Right? There's no point in having, sacrificing yourself for 100 women when the women weren't there to, they didn't have the skills to protect the tribe, right? So just a completely different world, right? If we have that mentality now, it's just the wrong mentality for the environment that we're in. Not that that we don't have the marauding masses now.
So do you think that's where the testosterone originally came from? From that?
I don't know. I don't know. As I said, I'm way out of my league. But I'm just saying that testosterone causes that sort of. I'm assuming it causes the aggression, right? High testosterone and the estrogen. If you've got low estrogen, high testosterone, that's out of balance. And, if you've got higher in one, maybe a little bit more effeminate in terms of your behavior. Doesn't mean you're weak or not, right? So
no.
Again, it's the context, isn't it? Right. So
that's where
50 years ago, when my father lived, right, and he was my age, completely different, right? And so we are rapidly having to adapt, and our operating system doesn't allow us to do that. And that's what
we're trying to do here. Is it trying to let's write the code
so we can slow down. Slow down.
But I want to explore that, because from the testosterone thing, and I'm glad you come back to your parents as well there, because I've read in places where the whole part of the point of getting together, and my mum said this as well, is you both have strengths, and by getting together, it actually becomes more than the sum of the parts. What you get but what you get actually becomes, so rather than 1 + 1 = 2, it becomes 3 or more. And part of that, when we talk about that from the side of things, like when you mentioned testosterone, and we, just the research, and I'm sure someone will complain, but anyway, whatever, that women have a higher level of empathy than men. And the whole point of coming together is that, one of the points for coming together was men learnt to be more empathetic. They could control. Maybe it's that control of that testosterone, and that's proven in the modern world now. Men in happy relationships, they earn more money, they live longer, and they have more sex. There's a ton of research that shows that. And part of the reason they say that the men earn more money is because in a happy relationship, they've actually learned to be more empathetic. They've learned to listen, coming back to your point of being awareness and communication. And as a result of that, maybe that's part of how they're controlling the testosterone. They're not just running rampant and wild. And if I had the choice, I'd go nuts. But it's not going to get me anywhere in society. If I was out by myself in a hillbilly somewhere, I wouldn't care. It's like living my jocks all day and run around, whatever. But we live in society where to get along well, and we actually. That example of me living in a cave somewhere, which is exactly what it would be. I wouldn't have jocks on because I wouldn't have invented them, because I wouldn't have had that environment. We have that social group where we actually learn and innovate together. Maybe is that the part of that balance of when we're talking about a framework for what is manly, is understanding that we need that balance, whether and same sex or whatever, but that's rather than say male or female, we'll say masculine and feminine, but we need to have something where we have that balance. You mentioned yin and yang before. We need that balance because that's what makes our life better.
Yeah, that's a real deep one, isn't it? It's because there's so many.
You can't get out now.
there's so many different solutions to that, and there's so many nuanced circumstances. So it's like, well, yes, that could work if in that situation, if you like, for example, where we are now, there's like a heterosexual relationship. Well, that could work in that, where you have that testosterone and estrogen and more empathy, and a male learns from that, right? And that works in that situation. Well, how does a same-sex male couple, how do they communicate correctly? How do they?
I don't know all same-sex couples, but of all the ones that I do know, and I've known quite a few over the years and had lots of gay friends, there's always been a masculine and a feminine. That's why I wanted to shift it from male and female. Now, how that works within the biology of testosterone, and maybe if it's male or same-sex male or female, maybe the testosterone level is higher in the person that's more masculine. I'm not sure on that, how to answer that.
Yeah, possibly. Yeah, I guess my point was that each situation has its own nuance, right? And if you're in that situation, then you need to be aware of what that situation is and be open.
You come back to that awareness word, don't you?
Right?
Yeah.
It's the core. Honestly. Because if you close, everybody has an opinion, right? Everyone has an opinion, and everyone's opinion is right because it's your opinion,
for sure,
right? It might be different.
Well, that's why we're having these conversations.
It's not right or it's not right or wrong. It's just different. And what happens is people look for evidence to support their theory because they don't want to be wrong. So they're not going to look for evidence that disproves that they believe that this is the way that things should be done, because that means that they have to give up their beliefs. Right? Yeah. So really what do? We walk around in
well, that comes back to that. I was asked that question today. Sorry, go ahead. I was going to say I was asked that question today about how people were. What was the one thing that my one thing takeaway for life, and it was life is easy, but I think is that people holding on to beliefs because they're just holding on to them as opposed to listening and being aware.
Yep, and there's a real psychology behind it. And I'm reading a number of books in that space, and because I'm really interested in how people make decisions and why they make decisions or why they have certain beliefs. If you're interested in American politics, and particularly around the 2016 election was more interesting than 2021, but when Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump were at each other, and I was transfixed by this, right? And only because I was really interested in the dynamic between the two positions, or the two ethos. Because if you watched Fox News, and you listened to them with an open mind, and whatever they said, you went, yeah, that sounds about right, with an open mind.
Yeah.
And then if you watch CNN with an open mind and you listen to them, you would go, yeah, that sounds about right. Right? And they're talking about the same situation, the same 30-second media grab.
Yeah.
Right? Because the people, you're looking for evidence to support your theory. So if you think that that's wrong and someone says that that's right, well, you're not going to listen to them.
Yeah.
Right? Because it doesn't support you. So I think what we need to do, but men, or in people. Let's just not talk about men. I think if we just simply say people who are less attached to a position and are open to listening. They don't have to change their view. They just have to be open to listening. So if you're having, as a man, if you're having a conversation with someone who has a different position to you, they're a woman, they're gay, they're a child, they're an adult, they're elderly, they're an octogenarian, they're a left, they're a right, whatever.
Yeah.
And your whole being then is just listening to their point of view. You don't have to agree with it.
Yeah.
You don't have to agree with it. But when you understand that, it gives you a broader perspective, and then you can maybe appreciate it. You don't have to agree with it, but you can appreciate that person has that particular viewpoint. Right? Oh, right. I never looked at it that way. I still don't agree with it. Right? But at least I understand your viewpoint of it.
Yeah. I think if you're arguing with someone over a point, then you're not looking at it from their point of view, because if you had the same point of view, you wouldn't be having an argument. So that's a good gauge. Well, I'm using that as a gauge to see whether you're actually really listening to what the other person says. Because if you are having an argument with someone, you're not listening. Yeah,
you can still disagree.
Yeah,
right? You can still have an argument, and the argument is over your position. But it's it's the old story: is if you know what the other person's position is, you can find their weakness. Right?
You're talking from the structure of my negotiation magic course.
Yeah. So,
you can, and this is one of the principles. You can be agreeable without agreeing.
Yep, exactly. But it's a double-edged sword, isn't it? So that requires you to also open up and be open to there. And so
which I think gives you more power.
Yeah, well, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. It's
the opportunity to grow is how I look at that, and that's what. And then using that negotiation example, it's when you were saying you're being open to learn from them. If you're learning from them, you're gathering information. If you're learning, then you're growing. You can take that on board, but to do that, to learn anything, you have to let go of something. Otherwise, you can't learn.
Yep. Yeah, there's been some fascinating experiments with people where they've actually taken them from various different socioeconomic environments. So putting Jews with Arabs, with people from Africa, rich people, poor people, all together in the one room.
Yeah,
right. For not just for a couple of hours, but living together over a period of time, and forcing the people willingly, right? But forcing those people to have conversations about their beliefs and values.
Yeah.
And without any expectation that you're going to change your views, but just simply the fact that you've experienced that, and that person, even though they have completely different views to you, they're just a human people. They're just a human being. They care as much about themselves and others as much as you care about yourself and others. And it's when you get that ability to look at the other person without any judgment, right, at all. You still don't have to agree with them, but that's when you don't need to be aggressive. That's a position of
strength, though, isn't it? Being able
Absolutely.
to look. And this is when we're talking about what is being manly. I mean, relay a story similar to that. A friend of mine, he works with a lot of people, both victims of violence and also perpetrators. And he was dealing with a situation in school between two gangs, where that, and they were violent to each other. They're physically violent. It wasn't, and so what he did was he had the principal send the leader of one of the gangs to a room, and he sent the vice principal send the leader of the other gang to a room. He didn't tell them that it was the same room. So they both turned up, and he was there, and he made them, have this conversation.
Yep.
Exactly what you're talking about. They got to a deeper level going, this is what, and it was interesting, as he said, and my friend Pete was telling me after this, it was 2 weeks later, the father of one of the gang members died. The first person at the door was the leader of the opposite gang to help the mum. Had the whole gang there with him. And it was just taking it to that whole level. And that again, you're talking about when we're talking about what is manly, this position of strength to go, to get that strength, because you mentioned, we talked about awareness and about, we mentioned love as well. I want to come back to that. But this ability to awareness of yourself and be comfortable with who you are so that you can listen to someone else openly without feeling threatened.
Yeah, it comes back to being that, in that safe space, doesn't it? And being able to not to have any fear that you're going to be judged. When you talked about that gang story, reminded me, forget the name of the actor, not Tony Robbins, because he's not an actor, but
he was in one movie, I think.
He basically, this actor ran a program in a prison, and basically it was a comedy, sort of, they were improv comedy, and what happened was that there were these gangs that were opposing each other in the yard, right? And they were knifing and all the rest of it. And when they got them into the room where they were doing the improv, it showed vulnerability. So they were then working. They were making fools of themselves in front of their peers and in front of the other people, right? And they let their guard down, right? And they were and laughter was the thing that did it, right? And so what happened then was, because of that, they became this, bond of men who knew the frailties of the others because they've been frail themselves, right, in front of that. And it was, it's a beautiful story. And what they are trying to do is that program in the custodial institutions in America. They've been rolling that out over a period of years. It depends on the political persuasion.
I'll chase up the details of that from you. We'll put it in the show notes, because that sounds fabulous.
Yeah,
go ahead.
No, it's one of those feel good moments, when you go, like, this person who put themselves out, they're a celebrity, they didn't have to do this. They've gone in, volunteered to do it, and had a fantastic outcome. And just go, well, we're just human, right? So It's a
I
beautiful
love that because
story.
you're coming back to we're circling around, but coming back to the same things. And you mentioned vulnerability there, and having the ability to be vulnerable in front of people and being okay with that. And we talked about having the strength to do that, which I don't think, from that perspective, it's kind of like the difference between a smile and a frown. It takes a lot less muscles to smile than it does to be a frown, or to give a frown. And I think, from as we're talking about this whole ability to be vulnerable. I know from my perspective, as I mentioned before, walking around construction sites with blokey construction guys, and I've told stories about stupid stuff that I've done, and that was easy. That didn't take effort. Whereas, and I've been, in the times where I've walked around pretending to be tough in environments as well, putting on that tough thing, that takes a lot more effort. Whereas being vulnerable, it was interesting how it was never ever seen. I haven't been in a situation where I've behaved in a vulnerable manner and I've had that being exploited. And maybe it's the circumstances that I'm in, but again, construction environments, you wouldn't take that as being that type of environment. So, and maybe too, I'm 6 foot, maybe that helps. But
and I think age, has something to do with it.
I was doing it when I was younger, though. There was many times there. And I was in the SAS, and there we had no problem hugging each other.
Yep.
It wasn't, and we're talking guys that, they're the best of the best trained to kill people.
Yep.
It's not. So one of the guys was the most lethal guy there. His hobby was sewing. He took in my pants.
Right.
And this is where that's why I've always found this whole masculine thing of, we've got to be tough. And I look at it and go, you guys will get you get wiped. I remember there was a great one where it was an airsoft. I don't know if you know, airsoft is like their little pellet guns that they use, and they have these fights with them. They had one special forces guy go in against all these airsoft guys, macho airsoft guys. He creamed them. They didn't get a shot on him. He killed all of them. And it's just.
But you talked about the SAS guys, or they hug. When I grew up, Europeans men kiss, right?
Yeah.
So when my father met my uncles, they weren't.
Maybe because I have that European background as well. Maybe that's why that wasn't. Because I've noticed that in the conversations, the people that I talk to, say from North America or things like that, it's very prevalent, this whole thing. Whereas the Europeans, it does. But then a lot of people from North America came from Europe too. So.
Yep. Well, I just we kiss, right? So I would kiss my father, hello, goodbye. My boys now, when we say goodbye, not just going down, that going home or something, but if there's a goodbye, we always have a kiss. We kiss, right?
Yeah.
And or hug.
Yeah.
And that's just been normal and natural. And I think this generation of young kids, I think it's far more acceptable to have a hug. You see it on rugby league, at least, where that's what I watch. You'll see the men come up. They'll do the slap of the hands and they'll give each other a hug, and right. Whereas when I was growing up, the Graham Langlands and Billy Smiths of the world, they would shake each other, shake hands at 5 paces, right? Not going to get close to you because we don't, I don't want to invade your space. So I think there's a bit of that too, so that whole, which is confusing, is like, unless there is a particular acceptance of that among in a group, right? When you come in, and like, I'm a hugger, right? So I always, even my mates who are Aussies true and true, right? You can see it when I give them a hug. They're, it's all right, but Steve, I'm going, no, that's what I do, right? Yeah. I'm not going to shake your hand, right? There's no way. You're my mate. I'm going to give you a hug because I haven't seen you for a while, right? Like it or love it, right? That's what you get with Steve Sandor, right?
Yeah.
So I think
But I mean, because it's interesting, because from my perspective, and I don't remember, when I think about the time with my dad, um, and he was always, it was never the disciplinarian. That was my mum. She was the one running around with a wooden spoon. But I said I don't remember my dad ever hitting me, and I certainly don't remember him hitting me, and I don't recall him ever yelling at me, to be honest. Maybe he did, but I know he was angry at times, but I don't remember him yelling out of control. But yeah, same token for me. I mean, when I see my dad, um, first thing we do when we see each other is give each other a hug. Can be in crowded place anywhere, and don't care. Love you, Dad, and we'll say that, love you. And I'm the same with my son as well. I always give him a hug, always say love you. Always tell him to like himself. That's been ingrained from a very young age.
And that let's hope that that is seen for what it is, right? Which is caring about the person who you.
I hadn't thought about that. You mentioned that now, because I never really. I think that's one of the other. I hated it as a kid. My mum saying, it doesn't matter what other people think. As a kid, I hated that. She had these beanies and beanies weren't cool then. So she'd wear these beanies and she'd go, "Doesn't matter what people think." And I go, "Yes, it does."
Yeah.
But as an adult now, I don't notice. I actually do it deliberately in places where I think, and I look at a situation, and it might be a small country town or something like that, and I look at some of the people there and think, they might be uncomfortable with this, and I deliberately make sure I give my dad a big hug and say, "Hey, Dad, love you," and he'll say, "Love you back," and it's just like, this is how it should be,
Yeah.
And if you don't like it, suck it up, because I'm doing it. I don't care what you think.
I think there's a lot in that, and also not taking yourself too seriously at the right time.
I love that, because that's one of the things in our code.
Yeah,
it's the second code is to laugh at yourself and not take offense at the opinions of others.
Yeah, and I think that's self-deprecation. Not in a disabling way. Not to put yourself down, right? Or to feel as though you're not good enough, so therefore you need to be this. I think probably the older I think the older people get to a point where they just don't care anymore what other people think, right?
Yeah.
And my kids, I'd love playing with that, because they just get embarrassed. My oldest daughter, she's 30, and the youngest is 22. And I just love playing with that and embarrassing them even now. Dad, you can't do that. I go, it's like, I hope they won't listen to this, so they won't know the game. So I think that not taking yourself too seriously at the appropriate time.
You think that is being able to again like yourself and love yourself, to be able to do that? Because I look at it from the perspective now, using that example of being self-deprecating and say trip over. When I remember when I did that as a kid, you trip over and get a bit embarrassed. And I know now, and there's a couple of times where I've tripped over in public, and I've just gone, yeah, and just owned it and said, hey, look at that, and people are going, yeah, and it not embarrassed at all about it. It becomes a bit of a celebration. But I know from my perspective, I'm comfortable with who I am. The fact that I tripped over is in no way a reflection of my competency at anything. It just means I tripped. Big deal. But that's because I like myself, and I separate a whole bunch of who I am, or separate everything of who I am from that actual trip. And I noticed it as well, for example, with my son, because I mentioned before, I've taught him from an early age to like himself. And, I remember inviting him and coming, because I played poker with some boys, and it's a very boys environment, in the sense of we'll tell fart jokes, we'll hang shit on each other, we'll pick on each other, all that kind of stuff in jest. So I was a bit concerned, maybe not concerned is not the right word, but I wanted him to come and have fun and enjoy. But same token too, I wanted him to find his own feet. The thing was, he came in, he could sledge with the best of them. It was hilarious. He was because I think, he's going to get taken down here. They couple of guys threw a few shots at him and he just fired straight back. And it's like put him back in their place. And it was like, I mean, and because they talk about the young Rams where they're butting heads all the time and it's that jousting sort of thing. Again, the arena, which we talked about before.
Yep.
In the arena, this is okay. It's acceptable. It was around the table. It was, and it was always, it was never abusive. That's why, or oppressive is the word I said. Oppressive is I prefer that term.
Yeah.
Not to be oppressive, and it was never oppressive. It was always in jest and jibing each other and stuff like that, which I'm okay with.
Yeah. Andrew Fox. He's a a Texas-based UK. He's a theologist, and a professor in some of the universities. I had him on my podcast the other day, and he was talking about that. And the first responders, the firemen, the ambos, the police, those the more nicknames, derogatory nicknames you have, the greater the sign of respect that you have from your peers, right?
Yeah.
So that in that environment, in that context, right, it's acceptable, if not encouraged, that you behave like that because of the nature of the environment that you're in.
Do you think it builds resilience?
I don't know. I don't know the context of that. I think it builds.
Because that's what I was looking at. It's like the Rams butting heads. Using that example, if you go out in the world and someone gives you a jibe, I know from my perspective, when I was younger, I didn't have that skill, and I used to get upset very easily by comments. And now I realize they're just doing it to upset me, and so because I realize that, I don't react anyway. And I've been in high level negotiations where there's been personal attacks. And it hasn't bothered me at all because I got that emotional intelligence to go, okay, I recognize what that is. I'm in control of my emotions, but it's through that experience that I learnt to do that.
Yeah. I don't know. My sense is that in those types of that may be an outcome. That may be that they're putting they're trying to put up a shield amongst themselves. But the way that Andrew explained that it was more about building a bond with each other, and it was a term of endearment.
Yeah.
And however, if you behave that way in a university, in an education environment, it's inappropriate.
Yes.
It's just not acceptable.
Yeah.
And
so you can understand it's a different environment.
Yeah. So if you go from one environment into another, expecting that behavior is okay, this is where we get ourselves into trouble, because we're
come back to that A word again.
We're not aware of
awareness of the situation as a framework for being manly. You be aware of the situation you're in. Yeah.
Understand the context, right? And then adapt to that context. And Should we leave it at that?
Yeah, well, because the part that
can we get to a higher pulpit than that?
Well, I think that the love component which is because as you were talking about that, I started drawing a little triangle, which I might want to develop a bit further. But at the top was love, and guys having the ability to say "I love you," and I said I have no problem saying it to my to anyone. I love you too, Steve. I can say that here.
Yep.
We have that. We've known each other for a long time.
Yep.
I do love you. You're an amazing guy, and I have a lot of respect for you as well.
Love your back. Not love your back. I love you as well.
Hey, my back's cool. I got a great back. I work out.
This is getting awkward now.
Yeah, exactly. No, but from that perspective, we've got this. It seems to be a foundational level of this framework for what is manly is a love, certainly for a love for yourself. And when we're talking about love for yourself, it's like an honest love for yourself, not a showy thing or anything like that, but you can be alone with yourself and be comfortable with who you are, no matter what anyone is saying. You're completely comfortable with who you are. That's what I've taken away from that as part of this framework is there's a deep love that a person has for themselves, and then when they have that, they can share that out with the world.
Yeah. yeah. That's at the highest context. Yeah, absolutely.
And we cover
the challenge is always to be able to broaden the message and get the message out, and have people who don't think like that have them come into an environment or a situation or a circumstance where they don't feel threatened by it. Right?
Well, that's what I was wondering from that perspective, because I know from my experience, people that I've shown a little bit of vulnerability to and just shown, here, all of a sudden they've felt safe and opened up.
Yep. Yeah. So I think it's the first move is by you, right? And allow the people around you to be, exposed to that and feel safe that if they feel like opening up, that they will open up. Now that might take some time, right? It might take some patience. The first time it's like, well, I've opened up. How come you haven't opened up, right? As well, I didn't open up for any other reason than I opened up, right? I wasn't expecting some payment in return for that. It was, this is how I am. Right? This is how I can love myself the absolute best. And because of that, because you demonstrate that, then people, as I said before, people are looking for information to support a theory. And the tipping point. So it's okay to behave that way. It's okay to behave in a disrespectful way, because everybody does that, until the tipping point comes to a point where behaving disrespectfully is no longer the majority. You're in a minority, and now all of a sudden you can't behave like that because you stick out like a sore thumb. Whereas previously, the person who did show vulnerability was on their own, and that does take courage when you're the only one that's doing it, and everybody else in that environment is looking at you going, what are you doing? Right? That does take courage. Yeah. But if you feel strongly about it, it's walking into the.
I would say that's that framework for being part of the framework of being manly is you have the courage to do what's right in the moment.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
Steve, it is always wonderful chatting with you.
It's good fun, isn't it? I love these,
and
mate.
I love where this conversation has gone. It's been so deep, so much. I mean, I know we talk a lot of business stuff, but this is the foundation of everything.
Yeah, it's enjoyable. It's that's the thing, is if you have joy behind it, right? So yes, it's difficult. It's all of those sorts of things, but if we just treat this with some joy. That like this has been unbelievably fulfilling for me, right? So thank you very much. I really do appreciate the opportunity that you give me to come and spend some time with you, because I always feel as though you give me the opportunity for me to shine, right? And talk about the things that I'm passionate about, and I hope that I do that in return with you. So
I'm deeply humbled by that, and yes, that's why I have these conversations with you, because I've learned so much from them, and it's so much fun and enjoyable. Time flies when we're doing it, because we've gone over 2 hours now. And
how does that happen?
It's because I think there's a lot of we both have a lot of love, we both have a lot of caring, and it's a great topic to talk about. There's a lot of help that we can do, and I think I know you care a lot about the world in the work that you do. And making the world a better place, and I believe I do that as well. And
absolutely,
I think there's a great way of doing that. So,
no, mate, you're a mover and a shaker, and I think this is, as you said earlier, I think there's a real appetite for this. So I hope the listener has got some value from it, and they can come and join the movement with us.
Sounds
whatever
good.
That movement ends up to
be. There's a lot of backup of people already booked to talk about it. So, and I've had some good conversations already as well.
Yeah,
so.
Wonderful. All right, mate.
All right. I'll catch up with you soon. Thanks, Steve. Appreciate it.
See ya.
Thank you for being part of the Share.Care community and helping people around the world prosper. You're creating a bigger pie for everyone to share. The more people contributing to the world being a better place, the better the world becomes, for others and for you.